So thank you. Yosef Beck, and I'll jump straight. I'm going to be talking about network security monitoring tonight. I'll jump to my intro of who I am. Let me see if I can get this Zoom bar out of the way. There we go. Okay. So who am I? This is me, my professional life on a slide. Ironically enough, I started with IBM as well out of college. I was there for slightly over a year in their business consulting practice. And I've worked for quite a number of years at a local consulting firm here in Atlanta called JB& Consulting. And then I recently joined IHG a little over a year ago, almost 2 years now, and started off at IHG in a a compliance role, and then have moved into leading our security architecture team. My involvement with cybersecurity started actually back when I was at Tech. And it started out because I got a internship, two internships actually over the 2 summers for a agency up in Washington, D.C. And they have lots to do with cybersecurity, let's put it that way. I did not actually do anything for them cyber related. I was actually doing physical security around shipping and logistics. However, I did pick up quite a bit of interest from that experience and have always had a security mindset, if you will, that's followed me along throughout my career thus far. So I put up, I know from the last speaker, I do have some contact information there. I've got my LinkedIn. I also run a blog that has quite a bit of security stuff, and I'll have this again on my last slide as well. So that's who I am. Moving forward. So tonight we're going to be looking at what is network security monitoring, seeing who uses it, how do we set it up, what are available solutions that are out there, and then what's the day in the life of a security analyst, essentially. What are we looking for on the wire, on the network? The goals are to give you a peek behind the curtain, if you will, on what the day in the life is. What types of tools are you looking at? What are you trying to find? What are the business processes that you need to follow? What technology is available, and I've been looking at the types of analysis. So what is network security monitoring? Robert Baitlick is considered by many to be the father of network security monitoring. He's written a couple books on it. He runs a blog. You can follow him on Twitter. He's pretty prolific with his writings. I enjoy reading a lot about it. He defines network security monitoring as a collection, analysis, and escalation of indications and warnings to detect and respond to intrusions. Interestingly enough, it's got nothing to do with network in its definition. You could do that obviously anywhere where you have data, but we're applying it to network. So he has these pictures, which I've recreated here, where he has the enterprise security cycle consisting of 4 primary components: plan and resist, where IT is mainly responsible and security as a function assists, and then detect and respond, where security, again, mainly responsible, IT assists. So looking at the swim lane for security down at the bottom there, the network security monitoring as a process is collecting data. It comes from many different sources. This is over on the right. Analyzing that data, and that's done 2 different ways: using indicators of compromise, or IOC-centric analysis, or matching to basically what's known, versus IOC-free analysis, or hunting for new things out on the network. Escalating when you find something that is fired off, an alert, or you find something new that you've never seen before that requires a response. That escalation process has a number of components. So you may learn something new that you now have to say, well, I need more data. I don't have enough. I found something, this is interesting, I need to collect more. So there may be a new collection requirement coming out of it. It may be a new analysis requirement. Now we have to start looking at logs coming from this device. We've never looked at it before. And then resolution, right? Resolving whatever you found. It may be as simple as, oh, that was a false alarm. let's scrap that. We don't have to look at that again. Or it could be something larger. So that is the business process, if you will, of network security monitoring. So who uses this? It's typically done in an organization that is pretty mature. So you're not going to find this in your mom and pop shops. You're not going to find this in small or even medium-sized companies for the majority of where you would find this. So even large companies, IHG, we are still pretty immature when it comes to a lot of these things. IBM does this for a living. They go out and they do network security monitoring for customers as a managed security service provider. And I trust that they do it for themselves. When I was with IBM, I was doing business consulting. I did not see inside their security at all. Government agencies definitely do this. So it's typically done by a network security analyst. They sit usually within the security operations center of that organization. And they're monitoring network traffic. They're looking for things that are out of the norm. They're going to be building rule sets based on what they're seeing to try to find known indicators of compromise or known malicious activity. They're going to be hunting for that unknown malicious activity and trying to identify things on the network that they've never seen before. So a new device pops up. Who owns this? Where does it belong? Does it have the right security controls in place? Is it communicating appropriately? So how do we set this up? I thought about for a moment having a slide as a joke. You may have noticed on my first slide, Georgia Tech, one of my degrees was in physics. So I was going to have just a dot and say, okay, pretend this is a network. But I'm going to give you a couple more pictures here to help out. So the basic internet picture of this could be your home. It could be a small network at a business. It could even be, if you want to extrapolate, to a larger business as well. The basics are you have the public internet coming into some sort of a modem that typically talks to your router. A lot of times nowadays, at home at least, right, your modem, your router, and your wireless access point are all one device. But let's separate them out here for ease of visualization. That wired router can have wired devices from wired user land talking to it. And then you can also have the wireless access point talking to your wireless devices, laptops, tablets, phones, etc. So we have a lot of different options here on where we should place our network sensor. So take a quick pause. Anybody have a guess? Where are some locations and what are the pros and cons maybe of where you would put those network sensors? I don't know if we can open it up for questions. Herb?
Sorry, I was talking to a closed mic.
No worries.
Mr. Hartman did exactly what I said, which is to type it into the chat. If you want to ask a question, you feel free to activate your mic. Yeah. So he said access point ?
Okay. That's a good guess. Anyone else? Between the modem and the router and the switch. That's right. Okay. Between the modem and the router. Yep, those are good. So there are pros and cons to each of these. So let's start by looking at between the modem and the router and switch. And actually, you could also put it in front of your modem, put it outside your network. It doesn't have to be inside your network, right? So the pro is, yes, you will capture all the traffic entering or exiting our network here over on the right. The problem with doing this is there's such a thing as network address translation, right? That's going on our router. At least with IPv4, all of our internal devices have an internal IP address, and that has to get translated to go through our ISP provided external IP address. When we do that network translation, if we put the capturing device between the modem and the router, we're going to lose visibility into our internal network IP addresses. So we will see all this information, but it's all going to be tagged with our router IP address. And if we put it on the other side of the modem, it doesn't help either. It's the same problem. So we could put it there. We will capture all the information. We just won't know which internal device is the one that's chatting. So another option is to put it between the router and the access point, or between the router and the wired devices. So again, there are pros to this. We're still going to capture all the data. The drawback is we need two sensors, especially if the wireless access point is truly separate from your router. You're not going to be able to do this with one device. So our third option, and I'm going to cheat here because I didn't have this on the original diagram, is you can introduce a new device. So this would be a single device where you'd have a wired switch that can do port mirroring, or you can do what's a network tap. In theory, your router may be able to do this as well with port mirroring, but you can have the wireless access point hang off of this device, and then all your wired devices can flow through this as well. And this allows your network sensor to then capture all the information flowing through between your devices and your router. So it'll know your external IP address that it's talking to. It'll also know all your internal IP addresses that are trying to talk out to the outside world. So there's lots of different considerations. Depends on what you're trying to capture, what network traffic you're trying to capture. But this would be where I would personally plan to put it within my own internal network. Any questions before we go on? And I have the chat up so I can see.
Hello, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Were you able to see my chat? I asked, so do you, and I guess you just answered, do you typically use option C from your experience in your line of work, sir?
Yes. Typically, I would go with wired, the
Okay.
wired switch or network tap.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yep. All right. So feel free to put in more questions in the chat. I'll try to monitor it. Otherwise, we'll keep going. So what are the solutions that are available out there? Basic requirements to be able to do this, again, is that network switch with the port mirroring or a network tap. You need a laptop or a desktop if you're going to do this with an Ethernet port that you can configure in promiscuous mode, which basically means you turn off the IP address. Your computer's not trying to talk to anything. It's just ingesting all the traffic that's hitting or flowing across that wire. And then you need some sort of capture analysis software. A lot of, there's plenty that are out there. These are some that I have used in the past. They can be quite fun to look at what's traveling across your own internal network. Wireshark, Microsoft has a really nice solution called Packet Monitor. All these are free. Definitely encourage you to go out, try them out, play with them, see what you can do. You can do it even with just your laptop, even without a network switch. You can install it on your laptop, plug in wire, and then turn it on in promiscuous mode, and you will see some traffic. You're not going to capture everything, but you will see some information, if nothing else, whatever's leaving your computer. So go hit Google, go hit Facebook, whatever you want, and you will see that network traffic flowing across your wire. And it's very interesting to see how the packets are constructed and what it's doing. For an enterprise solution, you're typically going to buy a standalone network security monitoring tool, or that will be bundled in as a feature into your security information and event management tool, or SIM tool. And we're going to walk through some examples here so you can get an idea of what do those look like. There are open source solutions of SIMs, that you can try out yourself. Security Onion is one that I've played around with. There's another one that I've seen recommended called the Helk. The last part is the Elk stack, which is Elasticsearch, don't remember, Logstash and Kibana, Elasta something. And I don't remember what the H stands for, but you can Google those, download them, try them out yourself. They are not the easiest things to get set up, but it is definitely a good learning experience if you have the time. So let's take a look. Security Onion, right? This is one I mentioned that's free. That is a SIM essentially that you can play around with. So it's open source. It's Ubuntu, Linux distribution, and on the right-hand side, I've kind of tried to break out how this works given the diagram that Security Onion provides online. So down at the bottom, you have your end user devices, right? So this could be your Windows machine, your Mac device, your laptop, your cell phone, etc. You can get host level monitoring and send those to your SIM. So here they've got the example of sysmon and auto runs logging information down at the bottom that's coming from the host or your laptop, etc. And it's getting sent into as a host intrusion detection system, which they've got represented with the OSSEC box on the diagram. On the left-hand side, the Snort/Suricata is their network intrusion detection system that they are using. So it's collecting data through that wired tap and going into Snort or Suricata, depending on what you set up, and it's looking at the network information and firing off alerts. You can collect other types of information, syslog off of like your firewall, etc., bro logs from endpoints as well and from network, and send those in. So the actual SIM engine is up at the top with a little whale, right? So you have Logstash, which is doing the data normalization in order to put into your database. Your indexing it with Elasticsearch, and then you make it queryable and visualizable for humans in the Kibana engine, and that's displayed to the analyst through their basically a web portal, right? So you log in and you can view all the alerts and everything that's going on so that you can make decisions. That's typical. That's pretty much how all SIMs work. Send in logs, it parses them out, it makes them consumable, and lets you look at it. So an elk stack dashboards, just giving you examples of what do some of those dashboards look like. They're all fully customizable. They're, again, not the easiest thing necessarily to learn how to do, but you can play around with them. Elk is a free solution that you can go download as well in and of itself for ingesting any kind of logs or data. It doesn't have to be security related, but you can see different types of security alerts here. There are things highlighting where geolocation, where is it coming from? It's got a list of countries of alerts, what types of alerts, over time, where are we seeing any patterns in the alerts coming in, etc. Splunk is another version I wanted to highlight. Splunk is not free, but it is considered one of the top of the lines, if you will. It's very expensive, and it provides very similar data though, right? There's benefits to using a paid solution, obviously. They maintain the system for you. It's software as a service. You also get access to their threat information that they're able to pull from across lots of different customers, so they can give you better insight, just like any other managed security provider, of all the things they're seeing out in the environment. So you can see some of the notable events there. They've got straight in the middle. It may be hard to read, but it's like SQL injection attack detected, or a brute force access behavior detected, etc. Lots of different things that you can see just by looking at the network. So what are we looking for, right? As the analyst, what are we trying to do? So going back to the definition, the collection and analysis and escalation of indications and warnings, right, to respond to intrusion. So the analysis component of that is, again, looking at two things, either trying to match to things we know about or looking for things we don't know. And it's taking that machine readable data that's going over the network, turning it into something human readable, creating more alerts and putting it back into machine readable data so that the machine can analyze for you and shoot out more alerts. And it's an ongoing cycle. You can do analysis if the communication you're viewing is unencrypted. You break the encryption, you conduct a man-in-the-middle attack to try to basically strip out the encryption, or you have access to the encryption certificate that was used to encrypt the data that was sent to begin with. Even if it's encrypted, you can still get valuable information from the metadata. And we'll talk through that a little bit here in a minute. But you can see that the best information you're going to get, obviously, is when it's unencrypted. You can see everything. And from a corporate perspective, for example, we typically, you will find if you're going to do this, you're going to have essentially do a man-in-the-middle attack on your own devices so that you can have access to that encryption certificate and be able to read the traffic that's going out of your network and be able to tell if there's something malicious. Because we don't want to turn off encryption. We don't want to do everything out in the open. We want encryption when we leave our network. And even inside of our network, I can tell you at the companies where I'm working, if I would prefer if communication is encrypted, even within our own network. But I do want the ability to view it as it passes through the external firewalls to be able to get out. And you can do that at the firewall level, at the network level, or you can also do it on the endpoint itself using an agent that basically is setting up a VPN tunnel. Everything's going through it, but that way you have access to the encryption that was used on the VPN tunnel. So many different ways you can do this. Any questions before I keep going here? All right, I will keep going, and feel free to put stuff into the chat. So let's take a quick look at the Open Systems Interconnection Model, or OSI. You're probably all familiar with it, but figured it doesn't hurt to just go through it real quick. So we have our laptop, right? We're going to browse Amazon.com or what have you. when we are looking at or making the request to go to Amazon.com in our browser, we're looking at the application layer, right? The joke being that people are at layer 8, right? And so we're looking at the application layer. We're looking at the browser. We're pulling in or doing our request over HTTP or HTTPS. That request gets translated and packaged, if you will, through different protocols all the way down to the physical layer, which is the actual wire that you're putting through the pulses of electricity, on, off. That pulse of electricity flows all the way through the internet and gets sent to the Amazon server, where they have to reconstruct that into essentially the HTTPS request that gets put back into the application to serve back the browser to your browser the information to view the screen. So there's this translation or translation down to machine code and then back up into something that people can view. Each one of these protocols are something that you can look at on the network. So you can reconstruct by looking at the raw data that's flowing across that wire, any of these OSI layers, if you can unencrypt it, right? So you can extract files that are flowing across your network. Somebody sends a picture, I can pull that out and I can reconstruct it and see the exact picture that they sent. You download a MP3 file, you can do the exact same thing. Obviously, you can actually replay somebody's network session if you have full access to their data and recreate their browsing experience in your browser to view what they are viewing. So very powerful, and people don't realize all the information that's flowing, but if you have access to unencrypt, you can view it all. So I took some screenshots from an older version of Security Onion. It uses a different type of dashboard tool called Segwil. They have since replaced it with Kibana. I used this one because it was a lot easier to get screenshots for, and I liked how it had everything combined into one screen. It may be a little small, I apologize. So the real-time events are flowing in up along the top, right? So the analyst is looking at these events as they come in. You can see they're kind of color-coded, and you can click on each one. So number 3 there is clicked on, and you can see over on the right the event messages, and this one says ET policy curl user agent outbound. Okay, so we want to look at what is this alert. Down on the left-hand side with the number 1, you can see the source name of the computer that made the request. So in this case, it doesn't have a name, but it's got an IP address 192.168.1.2. So that's an internal IP address. You can see the destination that it was sending this request to was actually a router, because it's another internal. By the 1.1, you know it's probably the gateway to the external internet. On number 2, top right of the middle section there, or bottom section, you can see the actual alert pseudocode, if you will, right? So this is the instruction that was put in by somebody to say, hey, fire off this alert if this rule is true. And this one's a little hard to read. I don't have everything there, but it appears to be, it's looking for anything that's TCP protocol that's going from your home network, which you can define in Segwil to say what are your home network IP ranges, and it's going to any HTTP port. So as long as it's going over TCP and it's using HTTP and it's originating from inside your network going outbound, fire off if, and it seems to be doing something around, it sees a password detected and it's unencrypted. So it saw you trying to log into some website and oops, it wasn't HTTPS, it was HTTP. And so it fires off an alert, because as a network analyst, you may be concerned, hey, did that password get compromised now because it was unencrypted? It flew across the network unencrypted and anybody could have seen it potentially. See, again, you can see the information at the next layer there, number 3. And what I like about Segwil is it breaks it up by the OSI model. So you can see it's got the IP information there. It's got TCP as a protocol, and it has the raw data there listed as well. If you want to look at the hex, and over on the far right, it even translates that into human readable characters. So it breaks out the protocols. You can look at specific flags in each of the protocols. It's a very, very interesting tool. So whoops, I think I skipped one. Let's see here. Yep. So going a little deeper into that bottom right corner, here's another example. This one is looking at a remote desktop protocol connection. So RDP is a pretty insecure protocol. We don't like typically people to use it. It's very easy to use. It's built into every Windows machine by default. It's turned on a lot of times by default. And it's very easy for somebody to break this protocol and basically guess your password essentially and get in. So this one is looking at, again, your home network going to an external network, and it's looking for any RDP. And to look for RDP here, it's again looking for TCP as the protocol. And it's looking for a hex value of 03 at the start of the TCP header, and I've highlighted those there. And then it's also looking at the characters D0 that's 5 character spaces in, and you can see that in the actual rule, right? It says content 03, offset 0, meaning it's starting at the beginning, and then further along it says D0, offset 5, depth 1, etc. So that's how you can. That's how the rule is built. So I wanted to give you an example of how do you build a rule like this. So it's looking at the raw data to know if RDP is being invoked or not. Okay, so then another thing that a lot of SIMs allow, and Segwell is a good example of this, is the ability to pivot from one type of tool to another. So here, going back to the original Segwell screen on the left, if you right click on one of these alerts, you can then go and pivot to another tool to view more information about the actual information. So here, this one is showing the raw HTML. So like I said, you can replay what the browser sees. So this is an example of a tool. You can go to this today, go to testmyids.com. All it does is basically send back, you can see the bottom line essentially in the right-hand side. It says DST, which is destination, returned UID equals 0, root, GID equals 0, root, groups equals 0, root. It's basically a test website to say, pretend that you're giving me back root authentication information. It's a way to test actually a SIM and see if your alerts are firing off properly. So this is another example of, hey, I'm pivoting from the alert to go see the actual information. Okay, this next one is looking at Wireshark. So I mentioned Wireshark is one of the tools you can use to look at the raw data that comes through. And it breaks it out by packets, actual packets. So there's no alerts here. It's not going to help you in that respect, but you can look at how was the communication built and sent across the network. So again, going back to the RDP connection, this one is maybe again a little hard to read, but the top window is displaying the line-by-line communication back and forth from each computer. The middle section there is the data in human readable form, and it splits out the metadata by the open source or open system interconnection level model, which is very useful. So you can drill down to see which protocols, et cetera, that you want to look at. And then the bottom layer is again showing you the raw hex or binary and human readable characters of the actual packet that was being sent. So it's a way to go really in depth, and it has a ton of different statistics and analysis built into Wireshark that you can run to show all sorts of interesting things, which we're not unfortunately going to get into today, but definitely a very interesting tool. Another tool is Network Miner. So I mentioned you can pull out files, etc. So you can see here along the top the different tabs. Right, you've got hosts. This gives you host information. So it's pulling out the MAC address, what was the vendor of your network interface card or NIC card, tells you the IP addresses, how much, what if it can guess the operating system based on the types of information and ports that it was using for the communication, it'll try to display that. If it can pull out the host name of the device, it'll give you that information. And then it can also pull out files, images, you can see messages, credentials. If it can identify it as part of the data, it'll just give it to you. And you can go and download that file or download that image or see what username and password was sent. Again, you're not gonna be able to do this if it's encrypted and you don't have access to break that encryption, which majority of traffic flowing out there is AES 256 encrypted, or using TLS version 1.2 or above. I'm not concerned at this point, at least yet, that somebody can break that very easily. But for other unencrypted traffic, for sure, any of this information is available as long as you have access to the raw data that's flowing over that wire. Okay, so how are we doing on time? 8:13. All right, networks. Okay, so I'm at the end actually. To summarize, right, you're not going to find network security monitoring outside of a mature security organization. This is not something that most people jump into. It's one of many tools that are out there. You can look at this information as it leaves your endpoints, your devices at your workstations, your servers. You can look at it as it goes through firewalls or other network devices. There's lots of ways to find this information, but the basic process of looking at the raw data, figuring out and reconstructing what happened in a conversation between computers, trying to see if something is malicious or not, stays the same. All right, so I got my contact information there again. Any questions?
So Yosef, if you were going to hire somebody, to come work in your organization, would you expect them to know how to do all these things? Or are these the kind of things that you would train them up to do?
They would get trained. Okay. Would not expect somebody, at least not in a starting analyst position, obviously, to know how to do much of any of this.
Good. Well, most of our students are going to at least have been exposed to these tools in lab settings. So they're going to have actually used most of the tools that you've described here.
Good.
Some of the lower level courses are using Security Onion even now. And they also get other tool sets that they get exposed to. Of course, it's dynamic, so it's always changing. So you're never really sure what a graduate's going to come out with, but you know that they're going to have been exposed to the concept that you just introduced, which is network security monitoring, in a very nice, compact presentation. So thank you very much for that. I think that one's going to get viewed some in our library, just because it's very accessible. So I'm going to I may point to that at some point in some of my courses and saying, hey, if you're not feeling up to speed on the whole concept, here's a good primer, and go take a look at your stuff. So thank you very much. Last chance for questions, students. Here's one. Out of the previous softwares you used, which one was the most helpful in your work?
So I have never been in a network security analyst role, just to be transparent there. I have played around with these in my home lab. I've played around with Security Onion. I've definitely played around with Wireshark and the Microsoft tool I mentioned, played around with some of the others, but not quite as much. I have never had the opportunity to work in a SOC. All of my security experience is much more on the governance, risk and compliance, or GRC component. And now in security architecture, I have to be a lot more technical, but again, it's more as a security, not security, but it's subject matter expert, right? And I get to pontificate, sit in meetings, and try to draft standards to help keep, the organization in line with our policies and regulations, et cetera. So I don't do the analysis. I enjoy it. It's a hobby, but it's not, unfortunately, what I get to do as a job. At the company I work for today, we do not yet have a network security monitoring solution, if you will. We have built some network security monitoring into our SIM, but we don't have a standalone tool that we use today.
Right. So I'll give a partial answer, I guess, sort of to chime in. One of my graduate assistant, his name is James Blanton. He is a network security analyst. That's his main job. He just left Truist and he went to work for Carrier. And he and I have talked about this, and all the tools that you're using are the individual, accessible, sort of hands-on versions. There are pro grade tools that do the same things that have much higher levels of integration. So that's why they use them. Things like Cobalt Strike and Carbon Black and some of these other tool sets that are very, very, very expensive, but only corporations can afford to buy them. But they are very, very optimized with AI helpers and scripting abilities where you can write scripts to stitch them all together so that an analyst can effectively do what you're talking about, but with clicks instead of hours of labor and effort.
Yeah, the next generation of these tools, and we're starting to see this even with SIMs, right? Is they have security orchestration tools that lay on top of your SIM or network security monitoring, where it can say, "Oh, an alert fired off. I know how to fix that myself." So the system will automatically go out and correct something. It'll put in place a firewall rule. It'll block something, or it'll network access controls can be integrated with this to say, "Hey, if a device on my network is trying to talk to a IP address that I know is a command and control server, I'm going to kick that device off my network. It can't talk to anybody, right, until it gets remediated." So there is some automation that's coming as well
Right.
that a lot of these tools
That,
have.
that is, by the way, one of my favorite new words in our industry, orchestration. It's just a cool word. And
Hey, as a former consultant, I get to make up lots of cool words.
okay, well, I don't see any new questions. So Yosef, thank you very much for your time. This was an excellent talk, and I think I'm going to get some utility out of referring people to it over the next few years. Look forward to your next visit to our virtual classroom.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay, thanks very much, class.